Welcome to session 7, where we'll talk about how we can move ahead with the lessons we've learned from the last 6 sessions. My name is Stephen Breen. I'm the head of medical physics at the Odette Cancer Center at Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto. We'll look at 2 big issues in this session. The first, I'm going to try to convince you why we need to have a systems approach to understanding how we work so that we can do a better job in reporting incidents and moreover do a better job in treating our patients safely without incidents. And secondly, I'll talk about how to translate the lessons we've dealt with over the last 6 weeks and put those into clinical practice. So I view how we work in radiotherapy like this, that we have, that we're part of a big engineered system. And a system is a collection of interdependent and interconnected processes that are all connected together, and they work to achieve some objective as shown on the right side of the screen. Now, it's very important for us to understand what the boundary of the system is. So usually that may be as simple as the walls of our radiotherapy department or our radiation oncology program. But we're always working in an environment that's the hospital and that's our healthcare system. Within the system that we work in, we can group systems together and have discrete functions that constitute a subsystem, and we can draw relationships between the system. Now, as a general rules of system, the things that are in the boxes are generally not the cause of all our problems. It's these green arrows where we often find problems when we go do our investigations. So to get the best kind of care for our patients, we need to think of radiotherapy as a big interconnected system. So here's the simplest systems way to think about radiotherapy. All of our patients generally have a scan, they get planned, and they get treated. But we can pull out a little more detail. When we understand processes, and I talked about process mapping in session 1B, we want to have a beginning and an end to our process. So beginning is typically our decision to treat, and the end can be defined as the final fraction. To do all those things, our scan, plan, and treat, we rely on a number of auxiliary systems. Can be measurement equipment, can be our volumes of procedures and the documents we have, can be the facility we work in, and the software and the hardware, and the most valuable one of all, personnel. That operates within a radiation oncology department, within an oncology program, in a hospital, in Canada, at least in the Provincial Ministry of Health. So this is a multiply nested system that has lots of elements. But we work within, we sit under, or that those multiple nested systems operate within a certain environment where we're informed by clinical trials and basic science, where we work with industrial partners to innovate and to acquire and implement new technology. We have different professional groups, unionized, and in some cases professional associations. Sometimes we're forced to respond to public advocacy groups or public opinion, newspaper headlines, or even responses to crises. We also try to look out for best practice, follow appropriate regulations as required by law, and pay attention to guidelines for how we treat our patients. When we want to find out where the real story lies, we follow the money and we look at funding for our healthcare system or from other investors, philanthropists maybe, or industrial partners, and certainly insurers. So when you overlay that on the work we do, we realize we've got a very difficult system to understand with a lot of steps. So let's talk about how this system works and how it compares to other systems while I get the slides back in order. There are 4 different kinds of systems. Let's identify them quickly. I'm not going to talk about a chaotic system because although there are certain days it feels like we work in a chaotic system, that feeling I hope doesn't last for very long. So we won't pay much attention, we won't pay any attention in fact to chaotic systems. Simple systems have an obvious cause and effect. An example is the circuit that controls where the lights are on and off in my room. There are inherent patterns that can be legitimate best practice. For example, and there's standard operating procedures. For example, getting my driver's license is a very simple system. I have my picture taken, I present some identification, and I get a valid driver's license back. And those systems are consistent and efficient. Some of the subsystems we use in radiation oncology are in fact simple systems. The next level of sophistication is complicated. So cause and effect are present, but they're incompletely known because there are so many elements in these systems. There are built-in patterns, and an example of these systems typically we think of is one of those Rube Goldberg cartoons where somebody makes a pencil sharpener that depends on the connected interactions of a bird in a cage who eats some food, that trips a bowling ball to roll down a ramp to turn the crank on a pencil sharpener. So that can be a complicated, that's an example of a complicated system. Systems like that usually require expert knowledge. So for example, the interaction between a treatment planning system and a LINAC generally can be thought of as a complicated system as long as we're not making any changes. And one other feature of a complicated system is that there's usually multiple excellent options to complete the tasks that we're required to do. Now, this for me is where the work we do gets most interesting. Because we all work in quite large radiation therapy departments, we work in complex systems. And sometimes, so our systems have complicated subsystems, but the whole system at the level of our radiation oncology departments are complex systems where cause and effect sometimes are perceived only in retrospect, where patterns emerge and recede over time. So an example of that would be where we have a treatment planning protocol that is improved, and some patients are treated on the old treatment protocol, while some patients, as the numbers increase, for patients on the new treatment protocol. So these patterns are constantly changing, and some disappear and others reform. So how does that affect our thinking, and what's an example of a complex system? Well, this is from my experience many years ago when VMAT was relatively new technology and we wanted to treat head and neck patients. And the cancer center where I worked at the time, Princess Margaret, had LINACs from the two principal vendors, Elekta and Varian. The good commissioning practices were always followed at Princess Margaret. So when new techniques were developed, they were often built up by a group of physicists most familiar with the machines and then made available to each disease site. So the machine physicists had commissioned VMAT for use on the Elekta machine after they had commissioned it for the Varian machine. So park that thought for a moment and let's think about how we were treating our patients that time. All of those head and neck patients were treated on 5 different treatment units. 3 of the units were Varian, and one of them, unit 5 in this diagram, was an Elekta machine. So as we went ahead to schedule patients just to get sufficient treatment time for the whole cohort of 800 head and neck patients a year, if patients were sent to units, the Varian units 1, 3, and 14, they were able to have VMAT plans, but if they were sent to Elekta, that technology hadn't been commissioned as early. So because we had, in effect, we had an arbitrary application of a treatment technique, that situation changed over time once the Elekta machine was commissioned for VMAT. But because we had the treatment commissioning happening independently of the allocation of treatment units, nobody on either side of that divide was able to do the forward thinking to see how we could bring everything together smoothly. So it didn't matter what patients got treated on, what unit patients got treated on when it came to the technique that was being used. So in this complicated and in this case complex system, we weren't able to achieve everything we wanted until the Elekta system had been commissioned and then all 4 head and neck treatment machines could be used. So that's an example of how complex systems affect how we work in our radiation departments. So sadly enough, in this case, the patient scheduling really was driven by the physics commissioning calendar for the technique on the two different vendors' machines. But that problem was not, and in fact, could not have been recognized a priori for all the disease sites that we were treating at the time. Now, there's a lot of times people say, oh, well, a conversation will start. All you have to do to fix that is whatever. And I'm always reminded of this quotation from H.L. Mencken, that for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. So don't underestimate complex systems. And if you find yourself in a meeting saying that to solve a particular problem, a sentence that begins with, all we have to do is just, it's probably wrong, although it is clear and simple. One of the ways I showed in session 1B how to describe the work we do is this relations diagram. And I said earlier in this talk that radiotherapy is a complex adaptive socio-technical system. So it's complex because of all these very confused and not necessarily clear relationship between the elements that we have on hand here. It's certainly complicated because of the number of boxes and number of arrows, but it's complex because we can't predict all the interactions that may happen. For example, if we bring in under the imaging for planning a new CT scanner and want to transfer information to the treatment unit for our online guidance, we have to be sure that the CT scanner's DICOM format is well understood at the treatment unit, which may or may not be the case depending on the vendor. This system is socio-technical because we have humans interacting with technology, and it's adaptive because it's changing over time on a few different time scales. It's adaptive really on the scale of every patient who moves from left to right in this diagram because each patient is unique. And it's adaptive because we're always looking for ways to improve this system, either through new treatment techniques or new ways of applying treatments to our patients. So radiotherapy is a complex, adaptive, socio-technical system, and we need to appreciate that to improve the quality of this system and reduce the likelihood of error. Tricky thing is humans don't do very well in complex system because we have difficulty making sense of a situation for a handful of reasons. One, imagine in our radiation therapy department, we have medical physicists like me, radiation oncologists, and radiotherapists, and we each have a different vantage point. And for a lot of the situations that arrive, if we ask those three different professions how to approach the problem, they would come up with different solutions, all of which may be equally valid, but certainly are unlikely to be exactly the same. So from our one location, just from our professional point of view, let alone what our role is in our own department, it's hard to observe and comprehend a diverse array of relationships that we see in those all those arrows on the relations diagram I just showed. It took a long time. That relation diagram I just showed from decision to treat to first fraction has a lot of elements, and it took a lot of energy by a big team to identify those elements, and there's certainly cognitive limits to our understanding of a complicated and complex system like that. It's easy for changes to happen without paying attention to them, so we have difficulty with inattentional blindness. And most of all, rare events, or most relevant, I should say, rare events cannot necessarily be anticipated. We've all had unfortunate days where we've had major incidents in delivering radiation therapy. And it is never the case that we wake up in the morning and go to work thinking today is going to be the day where a rare event happens and things are going to unfold badly. We're not able to predict when some of these rare events occurs, and because of the nature of our complex systems, it really is impossible to identify all the things that can go wrong. So rare events can't be anticipated, and the worst situations that arrive for us, some major incidents that require a comprehensive investigation, are rare in all the cancer centers in Canada, certainly. So last comment on complex systems, and again, think about your own radiation oncology program. There are many interacting elements. There is change all the time, whether it's staff changing shift or the way we change how we treat patients. All the interactions between the elements in this complex adaptive socio-technical system are nonlinear, and so some minor changes like changing features of a LINAC in a record and verify system can produce disproportionately major consequences. The whole of the system is greater than the sum of its parts, and generally the past performance of a system does not allow to predict how it will perform in the future because external conditions and systems are constantly changing. So it's very difficult for any individual human to keep track of the entire system in which we all work. So ask yourselves, is the performance of your complex adaptive socio-technical radiotherapy system entirely predictable? Well, the answer to that has to be no, because if it were, we would be able to prevent all incidents before they arise. And I don't think any of us is able to do that. And the other question that's very important in terms of how we're going to learn from systems from shared catalogs of incidents like NSER-RT is the question of whether your own complex adaptive socio-technical radiotherapy systems performs like another person's. I mentioned in my other lecture in the course the example of here at Sunnybrook, we use the Pinnacle Planning System, Mosaic Radiation Oncology Information System, and Elekta Linacs. At another center, if the planning system is Varian and the record and verify system is the same as Mosaic, but the treatment machine is Varian, will their system behave in the identical way to ours? Not likely. The good thing is, on the other hand, that most of the problems that arise, or most of the causes and the contributory factors for significant incidents are not due to technical reasons, they're due to human factors reasons, how we interact with systems, how the systems have not been sufficiently planned and well designed. So there's a lot we can learn from human factors literature and good engineering practice, but we're not able to learn nearly so much from other disparate systems, distinct systems, performance as compared to our own. So if we look at the causes that are in the NSER database as of about a year ago, we see a lot of the causes are listed here. The most common causes: deficient communication, distraction or diversion, handoffs, things that I think all of us are very familiar with. Let's consider those and ask ourselves, if we have hundreds of these examples in the database now, how many more samples do we need to collect? We know communication can be difficult, and we can put protocols in place to reduce that. We know that we work in distracting and diverting environments, and it's probably impossible to eliminate all distractions and all diversions, but can we make for better work environments where interruptions aren't so intrusive? We can design work processes and not pay attention to how many handoffs we have, or we can know that intrinsically handoffs are more likely to cause errors, so the fewer we have, the better. So a lot of these root causes that are the most common ones, we don't need more examples to figure out solutions to these problems. With good design and thoughtful planning, we can address a lot of these issues. And these are well-known ergonomic issues and human factors issues, and I think looking at the quality literature and the human factors engineering and the human factors psychology literature, we can reduce the incidence of these types of errors without the need for learning whether or not the errors that happen in a province in Western Canada are the same as the ones that happen in Ontario. When I started my job at this hospital, one of the tasks I had to do was update the quality committee. And one of the things about quality committees, no matter where they are, is there is a finite amount of resources that you can use to address quality and safety for patients. And one of the issues the quality committee has to advise the leadership in a program is where we make quality investments. So it's important to consider that there's much more than incident reporting to achieving good quality. And we have to think about how much resources we want to put forward to incident reporting, and whether we should be making investments in ideas like process monitoring or hazard risk analysis and system design and the utilization of systems theory. So as you are working within your own quality committees and trying to improve quality in your program, please think about things outside the realm of incident reporting, and these will add to the quality and safety of your program. The word mindfulness on this slide comes from the realm of the study of high reliability organizations. And although some healthcare practitioners purport that high reliability organizations are a good model for healthcare, there is some discussion in the literature about whether that's appropriate or not. But the idea of mindfulness is very important. In fact, all that I've said about in my previous lecture on process maps and the value of understanding your process and the value of teamwork in building understanding of processes is centered around this idea of mindfulness. I said earlier today as well that incidents are create a window of opportunity to understand how our processes work. So incident analysis helps us understand instances of system deficiencies, and by understanding them, we can develop a deeper mindfulness of how we work in our complex adaptive social technical radiotherapy systems. When you consider where to make investments in your quality program, by all means include incident reporting as a fundamental part. But incident reporting is the element that's after the fact, after things that have occurred. And when incident reports give you a clue about how your department's operating and you want to improve that, fall back on the good quality tools of process mapping and process monitoring to understand your work better with your teammates. Thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed this series of lectures.